All right, let's take a look at your next lesson, which is word problems with percent equations. All right, now this could be a little bit tricky to be interpreting word problems, so we're really going to try to break it down into these three ways of thinking about it. Before we get into that, though, let's go ahead and take a look at your learning goals today. We're going to continue solving problems that involve percents, but we're also going to focus on using equations to solve word problems involving percents. And so we have 54 and 55 now today. Okay, so if adding 55 here also for page 7. So let's go ahead down to page 7 here, and we can take a look at your word problems lesson today. Excuse me. So first of all, let's revisit translating word problems into the forms from yesterday. So here's just some examples. So we had what is X, just understanding that that means what percent. So we are going to have to convert that back into a percent at the end. Of means multiply, 25, and is means equals 5. Okay. All right, next one. So that's if we need to find the percent. That's what that would look like. So what percent of one number is the other? This second type is finding a part. And so that might look like what is 30% of 90. So we're looking for that part that represents 30% of 90. And so we know what is our variable is equals 30%. We have to change that to decimal form, which is 0.30. Of is multiply, and then our 90. Okay. Our last one is finding the whole. Okay, so this is when you know the percent and you know the part, and so you're trying to find what the whole is. So we're saying things like 20% of what whole is the number 22, or another way would be the number 9 is 45% of what whole number. Okay, whatever makes most sense to you, I would just pick with something that you can really master and hold on to. Okay, so we have 20% of what? So let's pull this up here. We know we have to convert that to a decimal because we don't do work with percents. So we have 0.20 of what is 22. Or this one, I'm going to keep it sort of small here. 9 is, same thing, convert to a decimal, 0.45 of what number? Okay, so we're just translating, doing a direct translation with what those actually mean to solve. So we have these three types, finding a percent. Let's call this section A here, finding a part, type B, and finding a whole, type C, as we go ahead and look at some of these different word problems. So remember that you cannot do math with a percent. Okay, remember we always need to use and change to decimal or fraction form. Okay, so write that down and just always remember that we need to change to that or change back from decimal or fraction form if we're finding percent. So let's go ahead and look at the directions. We're writing a single sentence equation first that aligns with the problem, and then answer the question by writing the equation and round to the nearest whole. Okay, we need to make sure we answer the question with a label. So let's take a look at this first one. Your objective is to start analyzing what do you know or what do you not know out of this. Some of the easiest places to look are in the question itself, because that's obviously the place where it's listing the thing you don't know. So your math teacher assigns 25 problems. Right away, I identify that that's probably the total. You've done 60% of them. The percent is easy to identify. And then it says, how many problems do you still have to complete? Still having to complete is definitely a part. And so that means I don't know the part, but I do know the total and I do know the percent. Okay. And so when I look up at our three options, I can see this one right here. Finding a percent, well, I already have the percent, so it's not that. Finding a part, it says how many problems do I still have to complete? That's definitely a part. And so we're going to be using this format here. Okay, and so I'm going to label this type B, okay, just to make that connection. So let's go ahead and imitate that. So we have what is, and we're going to rewrite the simple sentence question. What is 60% of 25 problems? Question mark. Okay, and then we can go ahead and do a direct translation. And so we know what is X is equals 60%. We change this to a decimal by doing our 2 swoops to the left. We're dividing by 100. So we have 0.60. Of means multiply, and 25. Okay, and then just like yesterday, we can go ahead and solve this. So 0.60, because X is already isolated, times 25, and we get X equals 15. Okay, let's think about that as we write our answer. How many problems do you still have to complete? You still have to complete 15 problems. Okay. And so we want to reread the question and then write the answer. Let's make sure this makes sense. It's out of 25 problems, so does it make sense that I've done 60% of them and I still have 15 left? Well, 15 is less than 25, so it makes sense that 60% is 25. Okay. Or the 60% is the 15, and then I have that little bit left to get to 25. Okay. All right, number 2, let's take a look at this. We have you walk to school on 135 days out of 180 days. That just sounds like a fraction to me. Right away, I can tell that this is the part and this is the whole. So there's a couple things we can do with this, and we'll take a look at that in a second. And then it says, what percent of the days did you walk? Okay, so obviously I don't know the percent. Okay, and so let's look up at our choices. So A is finding a percent. Okay, I obviously don't know that because in the question it says what percent. You have a couple options here. You can set up this template here of what percent of the whole is the part. Okay, or we also know that we can find percent just by dividing the numerator by the denominator when we have like a fraction of a part and a whole. So your other option here that we want to write down is we also can just do part divided by whole, and that'll equal a decimal that we can then convert to a percent. So we have 2 options there. I find this the easiest way to do if you just know a part and a whole, because it makes it super simple. So I'm just going to write 135, okay, and that's my part, over 180 as my whole. And we know to create a decimal, we just divide those, which makes life pretty simple. We don't really have an equation to solve, and we get 0.75. Remember, this is decimal form, so we do our multiplying by 100 or 2 swoops to the right, and we end up with 75%. So that's pretty easy rather than creating that equation sentence. So what percent of the days did you walk? Okay, I walked 75%, and here's where your label is, of the days. Okay, all right. We're going to go ahead and take a look at number 4, and then we'll let you try number 3 on your own and then check your work. So number 4 says, the crew on the flagship Niagara last summer had 8 men and the rest were women. Okay, if the men make up this percent of the crew, how many people were in the crew? So how many people were in the crew? That means I don't know the total. Okay, I do know this part of men, and obviously I know the percent. So let's look at our 3 options here. We have finding a percent, finding a part, or finding the whole. Okay, I'm being asked to find the total amount of people, which means I don't know the whole. Okay. And so this is an example of, oh, we forgot to put A over here. Let's do that too. This is an example of finding a whole, which is type C here. And so here we go. You can see we have two choices. 20% of what is 22, or 9 is 45% of what number. This one makes more sense to me. 9 is 45% of what whole. However, one of the reasons why you might do this one is you can see that you're going to have a left side of a percent times the variable, and it's going to equal 22. So you have, it's basically the same thing, just another way of thinking about it. So it's really up to you about which one. Like I said, pick the one that makes most sense to you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the top one. So it says percent of what is 22. And so we have percent of what is 8. Okay. And so when we write this, okay, we have to first go ahead and get rid of this fraction here, but we're not moving the decimal point. So we still have 66, and you have to know what 2/3 is. And if you don't remember, you could always just do 2 divided by 3, and you can see it's 0.6 repeating. Okay, because we can't do, we have to change this to decimal form, so we have to make it look like a decimal so we can move the decimal place first. This is still in percent, remember, because we haven't moved the decimal yet. So now we can go ahead and divide by 100 and move the decimal over to the left, and you can see we now have 0.6 repeating. We can't do work with a repeating decimal, so we're going to have to change this to a fraction. We already know that this fraction is 2/3, and so this is what we end up with as a fraction. So we have 2/3 of means times, what is x, is equals, and 8. Okay, we can divide both sides by 2/3 or multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, this cancels everything out there and creates one whole, and so we multiply by the reciprocal here. Instead of 2/3, we have 3/2. You can see that if I put this over 1, we can do some cross simplifying. And I cross out my 8, divide by 2 for both, and I have 1 and a 4 here. Multiply straight across, and I get x equals 12. Okay, so 66 2/3% of 12 is 8. So let's go ahead and answer the question. How many people were in the crew? There were 12 people in the crew. And let's make sure that makes sense. 8 men was 66%, so the 4 extra women then, it makes sense, make up that little extra about 30%. Okay. All right, now you can go ahead and pause and try out number 3 on your own, trying to identify which style, finding a percent, finding a part, or finding a whole that is, and try to solve it out. Okay, then unpause and you can check. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at number 3, and you can check your work. So we find 9 books on a certain topic in the library. She tells you that those are 45% of the books. Okay, so right away that's saying if those are 45%, then this is our part. So notice how I'm identifying those in the word problems. Really good strategy. Obviously, I know my percent, and then it says how many books does the library have. That means I don't know the whole amount of books. Okay, so right up here, we have finding a whole again. Okay, and this is type C there, so I'm going to go ahead and just mark this. And we have my template of 20% of what is 22. Let's go ahead and try the other one for this one. So we have the number is the percent of a certain total. Okay, So I have 9 books is, oops, and it says is 45%. Oh, that actually works. 45% of, and then it says what number. Okay, so we have 9 is 45% of what number, and we're talking about what whole number. Okay, let's go ahead and translate this. We know that we need to change percents to decimals or fractions. So we'll make a nice decimal. So we have 9 is 0.45 of what number? We need to isolate the variable, so divide by 0.45 on both sides, 45 hundredths. Those create one whole, and we have x equals, let's go ahead and do that division, 9 divided by 0.45, and we get 20. So how many books does the library have on the topic? The library has 20 books on the topic. Okay, let's make sure that makes sense and is reasonable. So 45% of the books is just the number 9. So it makes sense that the total amount is 20. Okay, because 9 is close to half or 50%. And so that is definitely reasonable. All right, this last question, we have a little bit more to do here. We have a weekly salary of $4,500, which is really good per week. Holy cow. Joe is keeping this fractional amount, 1/3, as savings. And then the remaining amount, which would be his spending, right? He spends 50% on food and 20% on the house rent. And they want to know, how much does he spend on food and the house rent? So right away, I know that I need to be adding those percents together because they do want us to pay attention to both. So either way, we're looking at he spends 70% on house, rent, and food. Okay, combined. So we need to identify 70% of what amount of money. Okay, well, it's his spending amount. So let's sort of break this down. We know that one third. Okay, so first of all, he makes $4,500 in a week, and 1/3 of that. Listen to that word of. A third of. Okay, so times 1/3. A third of that. Okay, equals his savings. Okay. We can also be thinking about, if 1/3 is the savings, think about, well, how much as a fraction is his spending? Well, 1/3 is savings. That means 2/3 of that, of meaning multiply, is his spending. So this is the first thing we have to figure out. Technically, all we need to figure out is his spending amount. But let's go ahead, just for the purposes of this, we can figure out what his 1/3 amount is, and then you could double it to find what his spending is, or you could technically just solve for the spending, okay? Because think about this as over 1, and we would just multiply straight across, and then you can see that overall we're just dividing by 3, okay? And so to find his savings, we have 4,500 divided by 3, and so we have 1,000, notice my label, 500 is savings. Double that would be 2/3, but let's go ahead and just solve it the other way just to see. So 4,500 times the 2 is 9,000, and then divide by the denominator of 3, and you can see we also get 3,000 as his spending. So now that we know that, let's think about what our question is. It says he spends 70% on house rent and food, okay? And so really our question is, what is 70% of that spending amount, okay? So what is 70% of $3,000, okay? And you have a couple of ways of doing this. 70 is a multiple of 10, and so you could find just what 10% of 3,000 is, and you know that's just moving the decimal spot 1 spot to the left if we're doing that mental math, and then multiplying by 7, or understanding what 10% is and then take 30% away to understand what 70 is. So 30% away from the 3,000 itself. So you have a couple ways of doing this. I'm just going to solve it like we've been doing with translating. So we have what is 70%. We move it over to a decimal. 0.7 of 3,000. Okay, and so we simply have 0.7 times 3,000. And we get 2,100. Make sure you label it with your money, equals X. So 70%, so 2,100 is 70% of $3,000. So how much does Joe spend on food and house rent? Joe spends 2,100 on food and house rent. Okay, and there you go. So this will take time. It really just don't get discouraged because it really does just take practice identifying the thing you are trying to find and then remembering that translation format, okay, up in the top. Okay, but with practice, you will start to recognize and recall those three styles that you need to set it up as.